Welcome to Revolutionary Optimism. Issues like economic hardship, political violence, and the rise of authoritarianism have left many Americans feeling more despair than ever. Fortunately, physician, humanitarian, and social justice advocate Dr. Paul Zeitz has identified revolutionary optimism as a new cure for that hopelessness and cynicism. Once you commit yourself as a revolutionary optimist, you can bravely unleash your personal power, #unify with others, and accelerate action for repair, justice, and peace. On this podcast, Dr. Zeitz is working to provide you with perspectives from leaders fighting for equity, justice, and peace, on their strategies for overcoming adversity and driving forward revolutionary transformation with optimism. In this episode, Dr. Zeitz is talking with Bradley Tusk. Bradley Tusk is a venture capitalist, political strategist, philanthropist, and author of Vote with Your Phone: Why Mobile Voting is Our Final Shot at Saving Democracy. Bradley's family foundation is funding and leading the national campaign to bring mobile voting to all U.S. elections. Tusk Philanthropies also runs and funds anti-hunger campaigns that have led to the creation of $2 billion in anti-hunger policies and programs, including universal school breakfast programs, in 23 states, helping to feed nearly 14 million people. Before Vote with Your Phone, Bradley authored The Fixer: My Adventures Saving Startups from Death by Politics and Obvious in Hindsight. He hosts a podcast called Firewall about the intersection of tech and politics, and recently opened an independent bookstore, P&T Knitwear, on Manhattan's Lower East Side. Bradley is currently the managing partner and co-founder of Tusk Venture Partners, the world's first venture capital fund that invests solely in early-stage startups in highly regulated industries, and the founder of political consulting firm Tusk Strategies. He also recently launched Tusk Ventures, an equity-for-service firm offering world-class regulatory, communications, and strategic expertise to help startups and growing businesses navigate regulation, expand into new markets, and reduce regulatory and political risk. He was previously an adjunct professor at Columbia Business School. Bradley served as campaign manager for Mike Bloomberg's 2009 mayoral race, as deputy governor of Illinois overseeing the state's budget, operations, legislation, policy, and communications, as communications director for U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer, and as Uber's first political advisor. Here's your host, Dr. Paul Zeitz.
Hey, Bradley. Thank you so much for joining the podcast today. We're honored to have you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You have a distinguished career and you're still a young guy. So I wanted to start off with, if you could help my listeners get to know you a little bit, what makes you tick. You've done a lot of amazing work in politics and the political scene, then in the tech world, bringing Uber to life, and then all the venture capitalist stuff that you're working on now. So give us a story or a sense of yourself about what makes you tick.
Yeah, sure. So, I think, look, for better and for worse, even for as long as I can remember, I just never wanted to have a regular life. And my guess is that you can relate to that and understand what I'm talking about. And it just seemed to me that if there was going to be some point to having an existence on this earth, I wanted to be more than just have a family, make money, play golf, whatever, watch TV, right? And that sometimes means doing things that I think can have a really meaningful impact, like our work on hunger or mobile voting or stuff in New York. Sometimes it's things that I think are interesting from an innovation standpoint, like our work with Uber and lots of tech startups. Sometimes it's working in political campaigns and elections. So it varies from what it is. But to me, that's kind of always driven me. In some ways, the story of how I got started in politics maybe is the best way to exemplify it. So, I'm a first generation American. My dad was in the schmata business. We didn't have that much money, but I was interested in politics, and we didn't know anyone, but my dad had a friend who happened to be a lawyer for the Carpenters Union. And this guy, Brian O'Dwyer, knew I liked politics. And in 1992, I was 18 years old, and the Democratic convention was at Madison Square Garden, Bill Clinton's nominating convention. And Brian said to me, "Hey, would you like a one-day Carpenter's pass to the convention?" Great, thank you. And if you look in the newspaper, it says convention noon to midnight. Now, it's really, having been to a bunch since, 8 to 11, but I didn't know that. So I show up at the Garden at noon. And it's two dudes running for state rep in Montana, and otherwise it's totally dead. But a guy named Ed Rendell, if you remember him, at the time was the mayor of Philadelphia.
Right.
I had just finished my freshman year at Penn. And I was like, you know what? He's the mayor of Philly. I go to college in Philly. Let me say hello, see what happens. And, what I later realized about Rendell is he was probably literally talking to the empty chair next to him until I got there anyway. So he was happy to have an audience. We talked for like 10, 15 minutes. I kind of realized I've used up enough of his time, and I thanked him. And he said, "Are you busy back to school?" And I said, "Not particularly." He said, "Do you want an internship?" I said, "Oh, that'd be great. Thank you." He said, "Okay, send me a note. We'll set it up." So I go home, I write a letter, and every day I'm checking the mailbox, and there's no response. And what I know now, but didn't know then, is correspondence is the black hole of government. Everything goes in, nothing comes out. And I get back to school, and I just, for some stupid reason, think, well, I'll go see him. And it's a decade before 9/11. So I just show up at City Hall. I don't get to like his assistant, but I get to like the outer office assistant. And I say, "Can I see the mayor?" And it was such a crazy question to ask that they were a little surprised by it, because usually the people who do that are, having now walked past the equivalent of that office in my career 100,000 times, is they genuinely are crazy or they're protesting. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't protesting. I was just this very naive kid, right? And there were these like two old ladies from South Philly, manning the desk, and they were like, "He's busy." Okay. "Do you want to leave a note?" So, okay, sure. So I write a note, leave it. I get back on the subway to go to the dorm, and it hits like, "You idiot. You can't go do that. Forget it. Never going to happen." And then I get to the dorm. About 10 minutes later, the phone rings. "Please hold for the mayor." I said, "When are you coming to work?" I said, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. And worked for him all through college.
Wow. That's amazing. Thank you so much for that story. I'm from Philadelphia, and I remember Ed Rendell's mayorship.
Oh, sure.
And so that really hit home for me. And I did want to acknowledge your service. I feel like the service that you've done with the hunger advocacy and making sure all those kids get school meals, and it was touched my heart. And
Thank you.
you're the kind of person that puts your money where your mouth is and your energy where your heart is. And you really take bold action. And I just admire that so much in what you've done.
I appreciate it. I wanted to say selfishly, so I've studied a lot of happiness science and behavioral economics, and I truly believe that the most selfish thing you can do, the best thing to help yourself, are things that make you feel good about yourself. I have made enough money in my life now to know how I feel when I buy really nice stuff and when I do good things. And by the way, I enjoy the nice stuff. Big Mets fan. Unfortunately, I've got tickets right behind home plate. Like, I live perfect really well. But I also know that, when we pass a law like we did last year in New York, Delaware, Arkansas, North Dakota, that says that every kid now gets free breakfast or lunch or both, I feel a lot better than when I buy like a car, right? And so to me, if the underlying problem we're all solving for is the happiness we have in the time that we're on this earth, which is relatively brief, then the question is just what maximizes that happiness. And just from a return on investment standpoint, I would argue that the best thing you can do are things that make you feel good, not because you want to help others, but because it's the best thing for yourself.
Well said. Totally agree. But I think you have a unique gift in terms of crossing into the private sector realm, for example, and figuring out innovative ways to leverage for-profit endeavors for the public good and enhancing the people's voice. So I think the keystone story in your journey about that happened at Uber, where you were in charge of getting Uber picked up around the country. So tell us how your interest in the people's perspective and what the people wanted led to a political innovation that really
sure.
is groundbreaking.
I really knew nothing about the tech world at all. I started my first company in 2010, and it's a consulting firm that's still around that runs big legislative and policy campaigns around the country. So the kind of stuff that I knew. And I'm sitting in a meeting one day, and a friend of mine called and said, "Hey, there's a guy with a small transportation startup. He's having these regulatory problems. Would you do me a favor and talk to him?" Sure. That day, I become not only Uber's first political advisor, but Travis Kalanick, who was the founder and CEO, called me back and said, "Listen, I can't afford your fee. Would you take equity?" I had no idea what equity meant, but thank God I said yes. That was back in the very, very early days of Uber. And I spent the next few years running the campaigns all over the US to legalize Uber and ride sharing. And the kind of innovation that you alluded to is, we were a tiny tech startup at the time. Now Uber's market cap is at well over 100 billion. But back then, we were a tiny, tiny little company. And the taxi industry was very politically powerful. They had lobbyists, they made campaign donations. Like, they were not easy to mess with. And they wanted us dead because they were smart enough to know that we were competition. And they knew that they did so little to improve their product or service over the years that they knew that, the customers, if they had an alternative, would be interested in that. And that's what Travis knew too, right? And so we couldn't compete on the normal political sort of level. So instead, we're like, here's one thing that we do know. And if you think about, Paul, it's like the very first couple of times you did an Uber. Like, now when you call one and it says 4 minutes and takes 7, you're annoyed. But back then you were like, this is magic. I cannot believe that all I did was press a button and this car just shows up. I don't have to hail it down. I don't have to call anyone. I don't have to negotiate in cash. And so our customers felt really good about the product and the company. And so we just went to them and said, listen, if you want this to continue, we need your help. We need you to let your elected officials know that you want Uber to be allowed to operate in Philadelphia or wherever it was. And we put the functionality directly into the app so that we could connect you to your council member, mayor, state senator, whoever was the relevant person in that case. And millions of people did it over time. And we won absolutely everywhere because, and I know we'll get into the 10 rules later, but if you accept the underlying notion that every policy output is the result of a political input, if you think about it in the context of Uber, you're a Philadelphia city council member. The taxi guys give you $3,000 per campaign cycle. All things being equal, you do what they want because you want the $3,000 for the next campaign. But I just had 6,000 of your constituents tell you, hey, no, I like this thing. Don't mess it up. The political input shifts dramatically. And as a result, the policy output shifts, and we won everywhere. And then so somewhere along the line, it finally dawns on me that the people who are doing this for us, they don't even know the names of the people that we're reaching out to, right? They don't know who their council member is. They don't know their state senators. Maybe they know their mayor, maybe not. And I was like, okay, so they're pretty apathetic. And yet when we gave them the ability to advocate through their phone, everything just changed. Why? And more important, what if they could vote this way? So that's what led to the founding of the Mobile Voting Project, was this sort of recognition that maybe this could change the way we vote. And then that led to ultimately all the different phases that we can walk through.
Excellent. Great transition, because I wanted to make sure my listeners heard about your new book. Came out last year, called Vote with Your Phone. And it's one of Bradley's top passion projects, and with the potential of having a huge impact for our democracy and for our country's future. So I'm excited to dig into that now. And because you have a clear thinking, I love the part of your book where you talked about the 10 rules to demystify politics. I don't want to go through all that, but if you could give us like the essence of it.
Yeah.
I know you focus on many issues, but the bottom line was low turnout in primaries. What became your the clarity to focus on that?
So, I mean, as I mentioned in the intro, I've worked in city government, state government, federal government, executive branch, legislative branch. I'm a lawyer. Like, I've seen it from really every angle. And the thing I took away from it is, like I said before, every policy output is the result of political input. And every politician makes every decision solely based on the next election and nothing else. And there are exceptions. Mike Bloomberg was certainly one in my career, but there are exceptions. And if you accept that politicians are self-interested in making choices based on staying in office, then the question is, well, who are they responsive to? It's the people who vote in their election. And because of gerrymandering, 90-something% of the time, that election that really matters is the primary, not the general. And primary turnout is really low. It's typically 10 to 15%. And who are those voters? They tend to be the far right or the far left or special interests that can move money and votes in low turnout elections. And so those groups dictate not just who wins, but then what those people do once they're in office. So, of course, we either have the total chaos and dysfunction of Washington, D.C., and we're about to see the U.S. government shut down tonight on the day we're recording, or one side of governments. And to me, whether that's the state of Texas on the right or the city of San Francisco on the left, none of it is good because it's not indicative of what we really think. Like if the American people were genuinely, truly 50-50 divided on everything, that'd be one thing. But we're not, right? You and I could sit down with any group of people and 80% of us would be able to come up with a reasonable solution to guns, immigration, healthcare. Literally, you name the issue, it's not that complicated. The problem is the 80% don't vote in primaries. So therefore, their voice is excluded. And the 10% who do are the extremes on either side. So either gets us nothing or totally one-sided government. So we don't have to have a world that this dysfunctional, this polarized, this extremist, but the only way to change it, because you're not going to make politicians different human beings. Human nature is human nature. And my guess is that the senators in Greece and Rome were exactly the same as they are now. But we know that if we can align our collective policy interests with their underlying political interests, they will act in the public's interest. And so the question is, how do you do that? And that's a lot more turnout, especially in primaries.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. I do want to say, just a quick side note, that in Athenian democracy back a couple thousand years ago, one of the things that they did was they didn't use elections. They actually used sortition or lottery to identify people from the public, and they were the people that ran the government. And they had the entire government, the whole system, run by sortition.
And then was it just for life? Like, how did the terms work?
No, they were rotating terms. That was not for life.
So you couldn't get reelected or
I don't know the details of all that.
Right.
But that's
look, I mean, that's the argument behind term limits, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And there's some truth to it. A lot of the ways, and we can get to if you want, the term limits are actually executed undermine that incentive. But, that's the concept, and I don't think it's a bad one.
Yeah. So just as a point on that. But okay, so you have said that mobile voting is our final shot at saving democracy. So can you explain why? And tell us a little bit about how you've been doing what I call proof of concept. You've been implementing this in 7 states, you said, with different constituencies.
Yep.
So first start with why is this the final shot? And then give us some of your lessons learned from your early phase demonstrations.
Because I think the one thing that everyone listening to this podcast would agree on is our country feels really broken and crazy right now. And some of that is specific to Trump, but even in between and before, we've hit a point where no one can agree on anything who's in power. Everyone just screams and points fingers at each other. Things that are either important don't get done, or they're done wildly to one extreme or the other. And no one feels good about their government. I mean, when you look at polling about trust in government overall and Congress, right track, wrong track, it's the worst it's ever been because people have, absolutely no belief that their government can function. I speak on college campuses a lot about mobile voting. And, when I ask the students, who here has any faith that your government can solve a problem, literally no one ever raises their hands, right? And so at some point in those situations, the logical conclusion is divorce. And I truly believe that if we don't come up with some way to empower that 80% in the middle so we can move things back to the center and get reasonable things done and compromise, I don't think we'll be one country. My hope is that if that happened, it wouldn't be violent, but it very well might be. And so literally, if we want to save what I think is the greatest experiment in governance in, the history of the world, we've got to take some really radical action. And in this case, what that means is getting a lot more people to vote, which means meeting the voters where they are, which is on their phone. So, I walked you through the Uber story. So we did a couple of things. Once I said, okay, we should do this. And I arrogantly stood up on the stage at TechCrunch Disrupt and announced that I would do it. So at that point I was locked in. First thing we was test the hypothesis, right? And so, like you said, we funded out of my foundation. To be clear, this is totally philanthropic. I have self-funded this so far. I've put $20 million of my own money into this.
20 million. Wow.
Yeah. And this is totally just giving it all away. And we funded elections in 7 different states, both red and blue, where either deployed military or people with disabilities or both were able to vote in real elections on their phones. And not shockingly, when you put something on people's phones, more people do it, right? This was not rocket science, but it proved the hypothesis. And we looked at the tech that existed at the time because there was very sort of nascent mobile voting tech on the market. And it was totally fine for 3,000 votes from soldiers from West Virginia, 4,000 people with disabilities in Oregon. But everything you and I have just been talking about for the past, 20 minutes or so is we've got to get primary turnout up so that instead of politicians responding to 10% of the voters, they're responding to 35, 40, 45%, which means this has to work at scale. And our view was the tech that existed wasn't ready for prime time. And we also felt like in order for mobile voting tech to have integrity and be accepted, it had to be open source, which means the code is publicly available on GitHub. Anybody can audit it. And if you're a private company, you're not going to spend 8 figures to build technology and then just give it for free to all of your customers. All of your competitors, right? And so ultimately, it really came down to either the government should build this, and of course, it shouldn't be me. It should be the U.S. government doing this, but they're not. Or philanthropically, so that became me, and this was how I basically spent a lot of the money that I made from taking the equity in Uber. And so we spent the last 5 years building this technology. It is pretty much done. We will have it all posted to GitHub, the code and the documentation by early December. And the way it works is you would go on the App Store, you would download the New York City Board of Elections app. The first thing they would say is, okay, is Paul really a registered voter here in New York City? You put in your information, fine. Next question, is Paul really Paul? So the first thing is multi-factor authentication. So just like when you forget your Google password, they send you a code. Yeah. Then biometric screening, which is like how you open up your phone. That's
facial
now
recognition. Or
Yep. Okay, Paul is really Paul. Ballot comes up on your screen, and the ballot itself was meant to be as simple and straightforward as possible. Whenever you're ready and you hit submit, 3 things happen. Your ballot's encrypted, your ballot's anonymized, and you get a tracking code like if it were a FedEx package. Goes back to the Board of Elections, and they air gap it, which just means they take it offline. And once your ballot is no longer connected to the internet, then they decrypt it. Then a paper copy of your ballot is printed out. That gets mixed in with all of the other ballots. You can see where your ballot stands because the tracking code will show you it was received, tabulated, printed, so on. And then the underlying code itself, like I said, is open source. So it's totally transparent. Anybody can audit it. Anybody can verify.
Excellent. So that's some of the details about how the system can work. And I would recommend folks check out the book, Vote with Your Phone, because Bradley explains in great detail all the security features that are built into the mobile voting technology, including end-to-end encryption, end-to-end verifiable systems, multi-factor and biometric authentication you just mentioned. The audibility is central to this, and the air gapping and paper counting. So you have everything that's possible. I always say to people, we use our phones for our medical records, for our banking, for all kinds of highly confidential private information. Yep. Why can't we make the leap to do this for mobile voting?
The answer is we can. The people who tell you we can't just don't want you to.
Right. So then you have a section in the book about the top 10 concerns raised, and you've been trying to address all this. So I really want to ask you, how do we overcome the concerns, and what incentives does the public and politicians need to bring mobile voting to scale?
Yeah. So we'll separate public and politicians because I think they're different entities, obviously. But my at least plan and the way that we're going about it is to start at the municipal level for 2 reasons. One, when people tell me, well, Putin's going to hack this, I'm like, he's not hacking the Colorado Springs school board election, right? So one is, let's start with lower stakes. But 2, city government, in my experience, again, I've been lucky to work at every level of government, actually has the greatest impact on your life of anything. And yet participation by the public in those elections is the lowest. So the biggest disparity between impact and turnout is in local government. So my view is, let's start at the municipal level. And I am running legislation and working with cities and counties around the country now, where they can authorize mobile voting, make it available to their constituents. We'll be running legislation in 6 states next year that will allow those states to tell the cities, if you want to do mobile voting, you certainly can. But, I think as you kind of alluded to, it's going to be hard, right? Because ultimately, while the vast majority of people would say, yeah, of course, if it's secure, we should have to vote with our phone. If you are a lobbyist, a union, a business group, or just arguably a Republican or Democrat elected official, you very well might say to yourself, the system works for me. I get what I want. I get reelected. I don't have to worry about it. Why would I want to introduce any element of doubt or risk? And that is the reason why many, many people inside the system will oppose mobile voting. Now, they'll hide behind security and other things because they know not to say,
Right.
like, we don't want people to vote, but that's what they mean. So can't win this through inside game politics. But whether it's what we did with Uber, or more significantly, if you look at every major right in this country that's ever been won, the women's right to vote, Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the American Disabilities Act, same-sex marriage, the status quo didn't want to do any of these things, right?
Right.
They all only happened because enough people stood up loud enough
The
and long
citizens
enough.
movement, right?
Yeah. And that's so if we win, it will because we built a big enough grassroots movement that millions and millions, or maybe even tens of millions of people had their voice heard by their elected officials, change those underlying political inputs. And as a result, even though they might not want to support mobile voting, they had no choice but to do so.
Yeah, the other part of your book that I found important to raise here was about the generational gap, whereas it seems like even older people, either on the left or the right, are more attached to the old system and feeling like that's the most secure, even though you outline all the reasons how that has had breakdowns as well. But it's really Gen Z and Gen Alpha you talk about who really understand this is what we have to do.
Yeah, for sure. And look, just to be clear, mobile voting doesn't replace anything, right? It doesn't take away vote by mail or vote in person. It's just meant to be another option. So if you like going somewhere, go somewhere. You like filling out a paper ballot in your kitchen table, do that. But just based on turnout, most of us don't, right? That's just the math. Look, I have a 19-year-old daughter who's in college. And when she turned 18, was going to her freshman year, she sent me a text and said, "Oh, I'm 18. It was the 2024 election. How do I vote?" Right. And I'm like, oh, God. Because what I sent her was, here's a link to the New York City Board of Elections. You have to reach out to them and ask you to mail you an absentee ballot at college. Then you have to fill it out, mail it back. This is a kid that thinks that email is antiquated, right? She just operates on text and Snap and things like that. And so it was like just telling her you can't vote. And so if she could vote on her phone, if a lot of young people could vote on their phone, I think they would. But to expect them to do something that no one else really does is wildly unrealistic. And yet the people who have the most at stake, right? Like when the big, beautiful bill passed this summer and $3 trillion of new debt was effectively created, you and I aren't really the ones getting stuck with that. It's the kids, right?
Right.
They're the ones who, when Medicare runs out of money, when Social Security runs out of money, when interest rate payments for the federal debt is greater than any other category of spending, that's all their responsibility. So arguably, they should have the most say into the decisions that we make. And yet, because they are so disenfranchised, they have the least.
Okay, so that's about the public. And I mean, the pathway for this seems like it has to go through politicians.
Yes.
You're saying that at this city level or local level, that you have to have favorable state laws that support that.
Yeah.
So that means that we have to work through the political process to get this taken up. So how are you dealing with the hurdles at the state level? What's the difference between blue, red, and purple? And
so in terms of technically, there should be no difference, right? In the sense that local jurisdictions control voting, not the federal government one way or the other. Trump could say whatever he wants about mail-in ballots, or he doesn't really know about mobile voting, but I'm sure he'll hate it once he hears about it. He doesn't actually have any authority over it. In reality, what it might amount to is, assuming he is opposed to mobile voting, it's an effective veto power over doing this in red states now. Right. Because if you are a state legislator in a Republican state and you are terrified of making Trump angry, you might be less likely to support mobile voting. But also on this, for the same reasons, sometimes the enemy of my enemy strategy works. And it might be why we can get more blue states going. So look, I am open to all 50 states. I'm an independent. I've been an independent for 15 years.
Me too.
I don't like either party. So, I would love to do this absolutely everywhere. But with that said, I'll go wherever we're wanted and wherever we have a chance. And so, most of the states on the initial list are kind of blue or purple states. And we're going to do, full campaigns in all of those jurisdictions. So some of that is that inside game of like, we've hired lobbyists in 4 of the 6 already, started drafting legislation, looking for sponsors, all of that. And then it's a campaign that is going to require earned media and social media and paid media and grassroots and polling and opposition research. And we're going to have to marshal every tactic and every tool available to convince them to do it. And it's still going to be really hard. But my hope is that we can succeed. And the one thing I've learned from my time in tech with Uber, but really just all of the tech that I work with and invest in out of my fund, is once the genie's out of the bottle, it doesn't go back in, right?
Right.
So you can't, any just repressive society that tries to stop people from using the internet or social media, it never works, right? Look at Nepal. They just had a revolution because of it. So I'll take it wherever I can get it, because wherever is willing to do it, to me, is highly valuable, because once it's out there in the world, and then once we keep doing it successfully, it gets harder and harder to object to and harder to stop. So, I'll go, but if you are an elected official in any given state and you're hearing this podcast and you're like, hey, you should come to my state, like, reach out to me, because, we'd love to work with you.
Okay, beautiful. That's really exciting. Now, I want to give you a magic wand. I sometimes offer this to my guests on the show. And if you had a magic wand and you could establish a national popular vote through mobile voting, and a national popular vote that included mobile voting as an option as well. I agree with what you said about making mail-in voting and in-person voting still available, but having all 3 through a national or popular vote.
Sure.
Like, how could we make that happen? What would need to happen to make that happen?
So for the national popular vote, by the way, if we have a magic wand, I would add in open primaries. I would add in ranked choice voting. There's a bunch of things that are all good things to do.
Yeah.
So national popular vote specifically is about the presidency. And for the listeners who aren't totally familiar with the concept, as everyone knows, the Electoral College chooses the next president, and each state votes based on however their electoral colleges are allocated based on the way their state voted. The national popular vote is a movement of states that says, look, whoever wins the election overall, forget about what state they win or lose, whoever gets more votes, by the way, that would have been Donald Trump in 2024, is the winner. And we will, as the state of Maryland, California, New Jersey, whatever it is, allocate our electoral college votes to that winner, regardless of party and regardless of how they performed in our state. And the idea is, if you got enough states that comprise 270 electoral college votes to all agree to do this, then by definition, you have a national popular vote, because if they all went just according to the will of who won the vote itself overall, instead of one recounts in Arizona or Pennsylvania, whatever it is, doesn't matter. It's just what's the total, and that person becomes president. There is a belief that it is better for Democrats and Republicans. I'm not sure that belief is accurate, by the way, but the belief exists. And as a result, pretty much every state that has passed it is a blue state. It's something like 212, the equivalent of 212 electoral college votes is represented by the states who have passed it. And it's stuck there because everywhere else is purple or red, and they won't do it. But again, Trump won the national popular vote in 2024, even if he didn't in 2016. George W. Bush won in 2004, even if he maybe didn't in 2000. Ronald Reagan won it. George H.W. Bush won it. Democrats win it sometimes. Republicans win it sometimes. And this is just the presidency. But, just in the same way that I'll get people saying, well, mobile voting is only good for Democrats because if young people vote, they're going to vote on the left. And I was like, did you look at the presidential election last year? Because there was huge turnout by the youth for Trump. Right. And so, in fact, one of the sins of democratic politics is they take people for granted. Oh, if you're Black, of course you'll be a Democrat. If you're Latino, of course you'll be a Democrat. If you're young, of course you'll be a Democrat. And one of the reasons they're so good at blowing elections is they just take groups for granted instead of speaking to them. Instead, they just speak to a very, very narrow constituency in the base. They alienate everybody else and they lose elections. And so ultimately, I think what it would do is it would make both parties have to work a lot harder to show young people or whoever's going to vote on their phone, here's why our policies work for you.
Yeah. It's intriguing because you have the entrenched politicians that don't want this because they want to keep the 10% voters to keep them in office.
Yeah.
And then you have the political parties that both may have reasons. Well, theoretically, the Democrats would want this to happen. But I think I heard you correctly. You're saying you don't believe
Well, I think
whether it
like,
would benefit Democrats or Republicans.
my guess is Barack Obama would probably say, sure, if it's secure, we should do this. But if you asked a state senator who had 8% turnout, when Barack Obama was state senator in Illinois, I was the deputy governor. Even if you asked State Senator Obama back then, do you want this? I'm not sure he would have said yes. Right. Now, I like to think that he would, because he's sort of obviously a special and unique person. But overall, the point is, politicians are wildly self-interested. And look, there is nowhere that understands political power more than Chicago. So I'm not sure what we would have gotten from State Senator Obama back then. So yeah, Democrats in theory, yes. Democrats who run, but for example, my brother-in-law is a congressman from New Jersey, and he just ran for governor, lost, and he was talking about sort of the county politics in New Jersey. That's as rough and dirty as it gets. And those county leaders, they don't give a shit about democracy. They don't give a shit about public policy. They just care about power and patronage and corruption, and that's it.
Okay, I want to bring us to our final set of questions about the state of the moment. I think part of the purpose of my podcast is to help make sense making of what's happening in the world right now. And so I would like to hear your take on the authoritarian project, the velocity that it's working, at the pace at which it is implementing itself, and also the serious risk that some experts believe that they could do election capture, and they could also try to, meaning hijacking or distorting the 2026 and 2028 elections. They could also try to overhaul the governing frameworks legally, laws, or constitutionally to entrench their power for decades. That's what authoritarian.
I think they're already doing some of that right now.
They are. Yeah, they're changing the norm. So what's
So
your take about, I think that you have a solution, that is one thing. You named many other solutions, open primaries, gerrymandering. How do we respond to the authoritarian project?
I mean,
don't we need a package? Don't we need amendment packages?
Look, if you just to diagnose the problem a little more, the two things to me about this country that are truly unique is our democracy and our economic system, right? And if you said, okay, let's pretend that China installed the president of the United States, who was the Manchurian candidate, and they said, here's how we're going to inflict the most long-term damage in America. Here's what you would do. You would get rid of rule of law. You would get rid of free trade. You would get rid of independent agencies, independent markets. You would get rid of immigration. You would get rid of R&D. You would get rid of higher ed. You would get rid of intellectual property. And the Trump administration has literally systematically gone about doing every single one of these things as if almost he's a Chinese agent, right? Like, it is insane. Now, I think in reality, I'm not accusing him of being one. I think what he is a person who is so zero-sum and so narcissistic that every decision he makes, everything he sees, he can only see through the prism of what is best for me in this exact moment and me personally and nothing else. And he can't distinguish between Donald Trump's emotions, Donald Trump's pocketbook or wallet, and anything else, right? And so he literally conflates the two. So every single choice is solely based on what's best for him. And he obviously is an authoritarian who believes that the more power he has. Like, one example that just happened this week is the TikTok deal, right? So TikTok was valued at $330 billion by some estimates. The deal was for $14 billion, right? So it's like a fraction of a fraction of a fraction. Now there's some of the intellectual property is also China. So it's not a total, it's some apples and oranges, but at the end of the day, it is exponentially undervalued. And who got it? Larry Ellison, a bunch of Saudis, the Murdochs, his buddies, right? And what does that mean? A, Trump might have money on the back end of it. Who knows, right? But B, it certainly means that those same algorithms that were being manipulated by China, which I strongly believe, to impact U.S. perception on various issues, can now be manipulated by Trump, right? And so if the best corridors of influence now are not NBC Nightly News or the Washington Post, but TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, he really now has, a lot of control over all of those platforms, right? He and Elon probably have an uneasy truce right now, but like, if Trump wanted to get a message out on Twitter, I'm pretty sure Elon would do it. Zuckerberg seems both terrified and enamored of Trump. He owns Truth Social personally. He just gave TikTok to his buddies. So, ultimately, if you take the things that people seem to care about and participate in and respond to, which is not democracy or government, but it is social media, he has, consolidated a tremendous amount of influence there. And that's just one area. I mean, there are so many, right? So, look, from a longer term point of view, it's structural systematic reforms. It's mobile voting. It's national popular vote. It's, things that ultimately make it harder for any one entity, but on the left or the right, either side, to consolidate that much control. It's things like the independence of the Fed. Jerome Powell, I think, is doing an exceptional job by just refusing to resign. Like, look, I'm not an economist, so on any given interest rate choice, he may or may not be right. I don't know. I have a point of view, but it doesn't mean anything. But just the very fact that he's preserving the independence of the Fed by hanging in there is pretty exceptional. For now, yeah. And his term runs out, I think, in May, so it's not going to last that much longer either way. But if you're like Republicans in the Senate and you confirm Pete Hegseth, you confirm Kash Patel, you confirm Tulsi Gabbard, Bobby Kennedy Jr., all these people. Why did you do that? Because you know that in your next primary, turnout will be about 13%, 15%. And those are the hard right voters who listen to Trump. And if Trump tells them not to vote for you, they're not going to vote for you, right? And if their choice, if you're one of the 53 Republican senators, and by the way, Democrats are just as bad on their 47, just the Republicans have to be in power right now. If you are one of these 53 senators, you say, okay, maybe Pete Hegseth is an idiot who shouldn't be in charge of the nukes. But if the risk is Hegseth accidentally setting off the nuclear bombs, which seems possible given his track record, or me potentially losing my next primary, there's no question in their mind, right? They'll take the worst outcome for America and the world every day of the week. But if turnout in those Republican Senate primaries, or again, Democratic Senate primaries or House on either side or anything else, were 42 and not 13, just by the math, they're not confirming Pete Hegseth. They're not confirming Tulsi Gabbard simply because they know that the majority of their actual constituents don't think it's a good idea. And when the majority of those constituents are now actually participating in their next primary, they have to listen to them.
Thank you so much for your work, for your clarity, the precision by which you're pursuing this aim of making mobile voting available to everyone in our country. I think that history will record that when this breaks through, that it was your tenacity and commitment. I do think
we'll see, man. I'm trying. This is like, of all the stuff I've ever worked on, this is the hardest thing by far. But it's also the thing that I think could have the biggest impact. And so I'm happy to get the chance to do it.
Your genie out of the bottle theory, I think, is very smart and inspiring.
Well, I appreciate that. And look, you do a tremendous amount of this work too, and I admire it tremendously. So thank you for all of that. And thanks for having me on. And if people are interested in this, you can go to mobilevoting.org. You could check out the book. I did a TED Talk that came out this summer on mobile voting. You can check that out. So lots of ways to learn more.
Please do that, folks, and check out mobilevoting.org and join the mobile voting movement. Thanks, great. Bradley. Have a great week, and thanks for all you do. Wow, that was a fun episode with Bradley Tusk. He's an amazing innovator, philanthropist, activist, politician, and so much more. He is a guy who has an idea and sets his mind and heart to it and moves mountains to bring it into the world. He's worked on eliminating hunger in school children across the country. He helped make Uber available to all of us. And now he's working intensively on mobile voting to make mobile voting an option for all Americans across the country. to allow for them to have easier access to voting in local, state, and national elections. The idea is to continue to do in-person voting, have mail-in voting, but also add in safe, secure mobile voting. He's created a new technology. It's open sourced and it's safe and secure. And the genie's already out of the bottle. So this is going to be spreading nationally over the next years. I just want it to happen immediately because I know we could have much greater public participation in our elections and in our government if we had mobile voting, because mobile voting is where we're all living on our mobile phones. So please check out mobilevoting.org and check out Bradley's new book, Vote with Your Phone, and learn about this amazing breakthrough for our democracy. Thanks.
Are you ready to be part of the revolution? To learn more about revolutionary optimism, please visit revolutionaryoptimism.com. To get to know Dr. Zeitz, please visit drpaulzeitz.org. And to explore building movements, please visit unifymovements.org. If you like this show, be sure to follow on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode. Revolutionary Optimism, transforming the world one episode at a time.